Hey there, everyone. Just Miss Gorley checking in for lesson four's assignment, which I gave yesterday, Wednesday, the 13th, I think. Yesterday was the 13th, and is due Friday at noon. I said that your homework is to read chapters 4 and 5 of Frankenstein, and that I will be reading chapter 4 on Google Meet. Now, since the vast majority of you have not been able to come during the scheduled Google Meet times, I'm just going to keep recording myself reading the chapters, and hopefully that's a help to you. So, today's lesson, we've been talking about tone and mood, and I've asked you to identify some charged words, specifically in chapter 5. So, chapter 4, you're not going to need to look for tone, but when you read chapter 5 on your own, you're going to highlight at least 15 charged words and phrases that help develop the tone and in one sentence describe the tone. So remember the general feel, the vibe, the atmosphere of the text. Pick an adjective, and you want to highlight at least 15 of those charged words. We've got some guided questions here, and the focus skill sentence goes right there. So chapter 4 is pages 8 and 10 in your Frankenstein document. So over here in my Frankenstein document, I'm on page 8, and I'm going to start reading. So chapter 4, just to catch up with chapter 3, Victor's mother had passed away from taking care of Elizabeth, who was sick, and he was about to leave to Germany, Ingolstadt, I believe is the city, my departure for Ingolstadt, for college. And he pushed that off for a few weeks, but his father told him, sitting here is not going to help you. So he decided to leave. His best friend Henry was not able to go with him. So he's going on his own. And I cut out a section where it just talks about him getting to his small apartment. He meets his professors, and one of his professors sees his promise as a scientist and gives him access to this huge library with tons of resources. So now Victor is at college, at university. Chapter 4. One of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endued with life. Remember, if we're not sure about a word, we go down, endowed or given a quality. From where I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered a mystery. Yet with how many things are we upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries? I resolved these circumstances in my mind, and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology, or the study of the human body. So he becomes extremely passionate about studying life in the human body. If I was highlighting charged words, I think the word mystery here helps to create a tone. Right, that he's obsessed with kind of these secrets, bold questions, which I think is one of your questions. What type of science does he dedicate himself to? What bold question does he answer? We see that here, right, of where does life come from? Where does the principle of life proceed? Okay, so unless I had been animated or filled with an utmost supernatural enthusiasm, my application for the study would have been irksome and almost intolerable, or annoying. To examine the causes of life, we must first have recourse to death. We must have an understanding of death. So to understand life, we have to understand death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. In my education, my father had taken the greatest precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. So growing up, his father did not tell him any ghost stories or spooky stories. I do not ever remember to have trembled at a tale of superstition, or to have feared the apparition or ghost of a spirit. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely the receptacle or the holding place of bodies deprived of life, which, from being the seat of beauty and strength, had become food for the worm. So he didn't see graveyards as being spooky or scary or full of ghosts. He just saw them as places where dead bodies were held, and they became food for worms. He just saw them scientifically. Now, I was led to examine the cause and progress of this decay, and forced to spend days and nights in vaults and charnel houses. So he's spending days and nights in basically kind of like places where they exhume dead bodies. My attention was fixed upon every object the most insupportable to the delicacy of the human feelings. I saw how the fine form of man was degraded and wasted. I beheld the corruption of death succeed to the blooming cheek of life. I saw how the worm inherited the wonders of the eye and brain. I paused, examining and analyzing the minutiae of causation, or like the smallness, as exemplified in the change from life to death and death to life, until from the midst of this darkness a sudden light broke in upon me. A light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that while I became dizzy with the immensity of the prospect which it illustrated, I was surprised that among so many men of genius who had directed their inquiries towards the same science, that I alone should be reserved to discovering an astonishing secret. Okay, another, we've got mystery, we've got secret, some of those key charged words. I mean, the scene here is just, he talks a lot about decay, about death, um, about carnage, about, he's obsessed with looking at how things go from life to death and death to life. And suddenly it says a light broke upon him. So I kind of picture like a cartoon when a light bulb appears above their head when they have an idea. So something sparked in him, and he was surprised that no other genius had thought of it before. Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of my discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, say, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. Wow. Okay, he says that he discovered the ability to make dead matter, so like dead limbs or organs, come to life. I think that might be, yeah, after much hard work, what was Victor able to accomplish? Let's go back here. The astonishment which I had at first experienced on this discovery soon gave place to delight and rapture. After so much time spent in painful labor, to arrive at once at the summit of my desires was the most gratifying consummation of my toils, or the most gratifying completion. Why is that saying it spelled wrong? I spelled completion wrong. Okay. But this discovery was so great and overwhelming that all the steps by which I had been progressively led to it were obliterated, and I beheld only the result. What had been the study and desire of the wisest men since the creation of the world was now within my grasp. Kind of starting to sound a little bit like a mad scientist here. Not that, like a magic scene. It all opened to me at once. The information I had obtained. The information I'd obtained was of a nature rather to direct my endeavors so soon as I should point them towards the object of my search than to exhibit that object already accomplished. I was like the Arabian who had been buried with the dead and found a passage to life, aided only by one glimmering and seemingly ineffectual light. I believe here he's referring to a very common myth or tale from the 100 Arabian Nights about a man who was buried alive and was able to find a way out. I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret which I am acquainted. Okay, so he says, I see by your eagerness. So just to remember who he's talking to, that he's telling this whole story to the captain, Robert Walton, on his ship. So he says, I think you're probably expecting me to tell you the secret, but that cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will perceive why I am reserved upon the subject. I will not lead you on unguarded, inardent, or passionate, as I then was, to your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier than that is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. That is an extremely important line. I'm going to highlight it. Right there, I think we see the epitome of the dangers of knowledge. Right? He warns Walton that if you follow my lead, if you try to seek things that you're not supposed to seek, that if you try to become greater than nature will allow you to, you're going to see the dangers of this. You're going to see the destruction, right? And that's what we call a cautionary tale. And I think that helps you maybe answer this question right here, question 3. Okay, when I found so astonishing a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it. Although I possessed the capacity or the ability of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it, with all of its intricacies of fibers and muscles and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labor. So he could restore life, but now he had to create a human body, which seemed difficult. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself, or one of a simpler organization. But my imagination was too much exalted or too high by my first success to permit me to doubt my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. So maybe he should have started with a simpler organization like a toad or even just like a block of cells, something like a bacteria. But he decides, because he's so cocky, I'm going to go for the most complex animal. I'm going to try to create man. The materials at present within my command hardly appeared adequate to do so arduous or so stressful, hard, 57, difficult um, an undertaking, but I doubted not that I should ultimately succeed. I prepared myself for a multitude of reverses. My operations might be incessantly baffled, and at last my work be imperfect. Yet, when I considered the improvement which every day takes place in science and mechanics, I was encouraged to hope my present attempts would at least lay the foundation of future success. Nor could I consider the magnitude and complexity of my plan as any argument of its impracticability. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being. Bum, bum, bum. As the minuteness or smallness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed, I resolved, contrary to my first intention, to make the being of a gigantic stature. That is to say, about 8 feet in height and proportionally large. So he decides to go all out and make an 8 foot tall, large human, not something smaller than himself that he could overtake a ginormous human. After having formed this determination, having spent some months in successful collecting and arranging materials, I began. No one can conceive the variety of feelings which bore me onwards, like a hurricane, in the first enthusiasm of success. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through and pour a torrent or a wave of light into this dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might in process of time, although I found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. Oof. So here, another one of these really famous lines where he is just all out mad scientist. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds which I could break through, right? This is him um, talking talking like Prometheus or like really like Icarus saying, I can be like the gods. I can take what used to be, bounds and now break them. And he thinks even possibly there might be a chance that he could renew life where death had corrupted the body, meaning maybe if he figured this out, he could actually raise the dead to life. People, maybe like his mother who had died, he could bring back to life. These thoughts supported my spirits while I pursued my undertaking with unremitting ardor or passion. My cheek had grown pale with study, and my person had become emaciated. Oh, I don't know why that footnote went away. Um, but emaciated means like completely stripped, like someone who's been starving or in poverty looks emaciated, skinny. So that's how his person had become with confinement. Sometimes on the very brink of certainty I failed, yet still I clung to the hope which the next day or the next hour might release. One secret which I alone possessed was the hope to which I had dedicated myself. And the moon gazed on my midnight labors, while with unrelaxed and breathless eagerness I pursued nature to her hiding places. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil as I dabbled among the unhallowed or the unholy damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal to animate the lifeless clay? So he's going into graves, he's torturing animals. My limbs now tremble and my eyes swim with the remembrance. But then a resistless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward. I seemed to have lost all soul or sensation but for this one pursuit. It was indeed but a passing trance that only made me feel with renewed acuteness so soon as I had returned to my old habits. I collected bones from the charnel houses and disturbed, which is like the morgue, and disturbed with profane fingers the tremendous secrets of the human frame. In a solitary chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house, I separated from all other apartments by a gallery and staircase. I kept my workshop of filthy creation. My eyeballs were starting from their sockets and attending to the detail of my employment. The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials. and often did my human nature turn with loathing from my occupation. Whilst still urged on by eagerness which perpetually increased, I brought my work near to a conclusion. So again, this picture of him really just going all out mad scientist. He's just obsessed, not sleeping, turning emaciated and weak. I think the next question was, well, we talked about what he plans to create. Where was his materials? He shares here that he gets them from the carnal houses, which is the morgue or the grave, and then he also gets them from the dissecting room and the slaughterhouses. Okay, almost done. My father made no reproach in his letters and only took notice of my silence, my inquiries into my occupations, more particularly than before. Winter, spring, and summer passed away during my labors. So he is almost a whole year he has spent building this creature. But I did not watch the blossom or the expanding leaves, sights which before always yielded me supreme delight. So I'm not paying attention to nature. I was deeply engrossed or obsessed in my occupation. The leaves of that year had withered before my work drew near to a close, and now every day showed me more plainly how well I had succeeded. But my enthusiasm was checked by my anxiety, and I appeared rather like one doomed by slavery to toil in the mines, or any other unwholesome trade than an artist occupied by his favorite employment. Every night I was oppressed by a slow fever, and I became nervous to a most painful degree. The fall of a leaf startled me, and I shunned my fellow creatures as if I had been guilty of a crime. Sometimes I grew alarmed at the wreck I perceived that I had become. The energy of my purpose alone sustained me. My labors would soon end, and I believed that exercise and amusement would then drive away incipient disease. And I promised myself both of these when my creation would be complete. So he recognized that he'd gotten a fever. He was just paranoid. He was anxious all the time. He said, okay, when this is all over, I'm going to go, work out. I'm going to take care of myself and then I'll be better. I just have to get through this. I think that's the last question. What physical toll does he take? Well, it says he has a fever, that he's anxious, that he's hungry, that he's emaciated, right? And now you have chapter 5 on your own. So as you read chapter 5, make sure you are highlighting 15 words that you think help create the tone, the mood, the overall feeling of the text. 15 at least. Answer your questions as you read. And then in one sentence, describe the tone. Give me an adjective, describe how would you sum up the feeling, the vibe of that chapter. And if you need any help, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, make sure you've completed your work for today and have a great weekend.